Quantum of Solace, a movie so bad I had to start a YouTube channel about it. This movie, to put it nicely, sucks complete balls Insano style. It's not entirely their fault, though, because Quantum of Solace was produced during the writer's strike of 2007. This is the main attributed factor to why the structure and the dialogue generally suck all the way throughout the film. I'm not going to talk about that, though, because there are already thousands of videos on this platform detailing that far better than I could. But still, I ask, was the editor on strike too? Seriously, even if you just compare the editing to the other Craig James Bond films, it stands out for being monumentally bad. I mean, look at this. Can you seriously tell me that you understood what happened there? In those couple seconds, could you even parse what happened on screen? To me, it looks like an unintelligible blur. I can't tell who throws the punches, who's supposed to win that little interaction, which side they're on, which way they're moving. I can't even identify James Bond in half of these sequences. So the fight scenes are edited horribly. Why? Well, for starters, they constantly violate the 180 rule. The 180 rule is an editing tactic that says that there's a bisecting line that divides the frame between left and right, and that you should use the left and right to tell your story through your fight scene. The general idea is that the duelists in your scene should not be crossing over this 180 unless the dynamic is changing or new information is introduced. The rule can be broken, and if used right, doesn't impede the flow or creativity of the filmmakers at all throughout the entire scene whatsoever. This, however, is not an example of the effective use of the 180 rule. It simply ignores the line and makes watching the fights confusing as all get out. Look here. They start this fall with James on the left and the guy, I think his name is Mitchell, on the right. Then the camera cuts to them falling over, and now they're on the other side. And you're like, what the heck? This scene features James Bond falling off a roof. How did I know that it was James Bond? I had to wait until the end of the sequence because I had no idea which one of them was falling off of a roof. So when you totally ignore the 180 rule, your fight scene becomes completely unwatchable. So maybe don't do that. I'm sure you might have noticed it when I was talking about it, showing them up here. There's a lot of shaky cam. I am a self-admitted D1 hater of shaky cam. I think it's almost totally useless. It doesn't tell you anything. It just makes it hard to watch a movie. Why is there so much shaky cam in this movie? I saw a video that I'll link in the description that talks about all of the Craig Bond films, but specifically notes that Quantum of Solace was sort of made as a reaction to the Bourne films, like Bourne Identity, which were coming out around the same time. Now, those movies had some really amazing fight scenes, and everybody liked them. So then the Quantum of Solace people were like, how do we get that to be in our movie? And then completely missed the point. The whole thing about the Bourne films was that, yes, while the camera was certainly handheld, it was not shaky. And so the energy in a Bourne Identity fight came from the quicker cuts, the decisive actions, and the high-impact movements that were going on between the actors. Not the shaky camera. But again, the Quantum of Solace people missed that point, so they were like, how do we make our fight scenes energetic? So then they just shook the camera like crazy and just made it completely impossible to see anything. Like this fight. We see a bunch of nonsense movement, and then somehow this guy ends up dead with scissors in his neck. Whoops. When did that happen? I don't get seasick, carsick, rarely get nauseous, but shaky cam is just physically hard to watch. I know I just praised the Bourne films, and I do think they're good films, but honestly the one critique I would have is all of the quick cuts in the fights. Because quick cuts are one of the other contributing factors to nauseating filmmaking. And it's about how you use them, in my opinion. Now, I'm not an editor, but there's two types of quick cuts that I think make the difference. So if I were to do a bunch of cuts but I'm relatively staying in the same place, I don't think that's really that bad. The problem is when I start to teleport all over the screen, or when the camera starts to teleport everywhere, but I'm not going to put that much effort into that. Either way, when you have to process a new location, a new setting, a new background, a new character, a new direction, all in 1 second, and then move on to another one and process all of that information, it makes your brain super confused, and you get super nauseous, and it super sucks. Quick cuts are not a good idea. Especially don't pair them with shaky cam, and they did both in Quantum of Solace. And it just totally does a disservice to everyone. You have these guys who put together some amazing choreo, I think, and you have these guys who work super hard at the stunts to get everything right, and then you just shake the camera so you can't tell anything that's happening, and you quick cut to confuse your audience, and it's like, okay, what's the point? Because as I'm used to it, the point of a fight scene is not just to look cool and to get your blood pressure up, it's also to serve as a narrative device. Yeah, if we're watching John Wick, everyone is sat in that theater just wanting to see John kill 400 dudes and just go home, you know? Which, like, I love those movies. They're so awesome. John Wick is amazing. I'm not saying that's bad. But in a movie like James Bond, in something like Quantum of Solace, you need your fight scene to be exciting and high entertainment, but also serve as a narrative device. We need to be able to know things about these characters. At the very least, I want to know, what are Bond's skills? Is he good at his job? How does he use his ingenuity to use the tools that he has to defeat an enemy, even if it's somebody who's supposedly far out of his reach in terms of ability to fight? And how do the enemies tackle the problem that is James Bond? Fight scenes also, at their best, should hopefully illuminate us on the actual narrative of the film. For example, in the original Star Wars trilogy, there are only 3 times that lightsaber users cross blades. You got Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, you got Luke and Darth Vader, and you got Luke and Darth Vader rematch. And each time, like, those are the only 3 times lightsabers ever cross in the original trilogy, and they're all at extraordinarily narratively important and weighty parts, and they all enlighten us as to something of the narrative that's important. You use those fights sparingly, and you make them important. And in James Bond, as a spy film, he should be uncovering stuff at the end of fights. He should be making things happen. He should be learning things about the plot. We should be learning things about the people as the audience. And we aren't doing that. And the main reasons we're not doing that is because of the editing and because the stunt guys were having to write the movie. So I end up going, is Bond a skilled fighter? I don't know. I saw about 50 cuts and then a bunch of guys were dead in an elevator. It just totally destroys all of the good work of the good people who are just trying to make a movie when you edit it so horribly. But enough about the fight scenes. The royal editing screw-ups happen much more often in the wonderful world of continuity errors. You know, when a character goes off screen for like 1 second and then comes back in with a totally different outfit on. Sort of like how at the end of Casino Royale, James Bond is wearing this suit, and then at the beginning of Quantum of Solace, where no time has passed, he's all of a sudden wearing a completely different suit, which a lot of people have talked about. That's a behind-the-scenes thing. That's not necessarily the editor's fault. What is the editor's fault is this scene, where M gets shot and freaking dies. I mean, she doesn't actually die. We see her scampering off into the distance, but when she's scampering off, there's no sign of injury. She fell over, and they played a gunshot sound, and in the next shot, she's just running away. She just shows up in the next scene after James Bond is done killing a guy, just totally fine. Why include that shot? It's like a blink and you'll miss it, split-second shot of M just falling over dead. And you're like, what? What happened to that? Or how about later, when Bond tells M that she ran past a guy in a hallway, except she didn't, because she was busy getting shot, and then when she ran away, we saw everyone on screen and nobody was there. Or how about this guy? You know this guy? You remember him? No? Well, he's supposed to be a quantum agent who supposedly makes Vesper fall in love with him, and then causes the events that lead to her death at the end of Casino Royale, because now that she's in love with him, he gets her to do a bunch of stuff, including manipulate James Bond and steal the money, and then she gets trapped in the elevator in Venice and dies. And so James is mad, and he's supposed to go after this guy and be mad at him. Except he has no bearing on this movie's plot whatsoever. He doesn't offer Bond any emotional closure, as we see throughout the rest of the series. And even in the rest of the series, they kind of did a soft reboot after Skyfall, and so his emotional state is kind of reset anyway. And so this movie really didn't need this guy whatsoever. I don't even know this guy's name. I can only assume they call him Andrew Tate because his MO is to get women to fall in love with him and then have them do things that he wants at their own peril and expense. The way that they mention Tate in the edit, though, where they just show him in one file folder in one line and then at the last minute of screen time, just makes him feel like he's a retcon, even though he was mentioned in Casino Royale through dialogue between James and Vesper. So how is the edit so bad with this guy and his continuity that he feels like that? Why not make him like Mr. Green's personal bodyguard, or like some sort of Dave Bautista inspector figure who's like this imposing enemy who James Bond has to fight, but maybe he's not like the big enemy. Instead, they just go, yeah, last little bit of the movie, 1 minute, guy's not even, he barely has a voice line in the entire movie. No, that's good. That's good for such an emotional impact. That's really good. But the Andrew Tate stuff isn't even the last of it. No, the best, the greatest, the creme de la creme of continuity errors takes place after the bombastic, exploding hotel scene. Basically, we see Dominic Green stumbling out of the rubble, trying to escape. Bond looks at girl, I don't know her name, and says, "Wait here." We then cut to a shot of the desert, and then Bond gets out of the car that we've never seen before and just throws Green out of the trunk. Now, this isn't the error, and I would cut the film some slack here because it's not that unbelievable that Bond can throw a stumbling, weak, rich guy into the back of a car and drive him out into the desert, even though we probably should have seen that. What I do have a gripe with is the scene afterward, which features Mr. Green getting up and saying, "You promised you'd let me go. I answered your questions. I told you everything I know about quantum." What? When? When did you tell James about these things? What scene was that? I genuinely, when I first saw this movie, thought that I straight up blacked out for like a minute because I didn't know about the interrogation scene. Or I thought that maybe it was so grueling of an interrogation scene that theaters wouldn't release it, and so now all the versions out there just don't have the scene in it. Nope. It's just not in the movie. In fact, they didn't even film it. They just were like, yeah, let's just refer to it with dialogue, and then called that good. They didn't even bother. Like, obviously I don't have a total window into the behind the scenes, so I don't know if the plan was always to just completely ignore it and just move on, or if they had intended on filming it and then forgot. But either way, why then include it in the edit? Why not just edit out that little conversation and just have James Bond drive a car into the desert, throw Green out, pass him a can of motor oil, and say, "I bet you'd get 20 miles before you consider drinking that," and then pop into a car and go away, and then cut to M telling him that Green was found in the middle of the desert with a can of motor oil in his stomach. Don't get me wrong, it would still be rather clunky, but, like, it would probably be better than just having this scene in that makes the audience think that they missed a part of the movie. So I ask again, was the editor on strike too? Or was it even their fault? Because on film projects, it's often the director who makes all the final decisions. Everything runs through him. If an actor gives a wooden performance they don't like, if an editor just totally delivers a big pile of steaming quick-cut crap, or if a CG artist just gets a subpar thing through because of a quick deadline and the director happens to like it, it goes in the final product. Ahem. Multiverse of Madness. Ahem. This is how you get Things like great actors in the Star Wars prequels, which I love, they're my favorite movies like ever, delivering totally wooden lines. It's not Natalie Portman's fault, it's probably George Lucas's fault. So the editing of this movie is trash, but can the editors be blamed for it? Matt Shea say maybe? Richard Pearson, though, he's worked on Men in Black 2, Iron Man 2, Godzilla King of Monsters, Kong Skull Island, and The Bourne Supremacy. So I can't imagine that he willingly delivered this edit. So really, the question should not be, was the editor on strike too? It should be, was Mark Forster on strike too? Thanks for watching.